Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. Each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry. Now, today we're lucky enough to have a remarkable guest joining us, Tejas Manohar, who is co-founder and co-CEO at Hightouch. Hello, Tejas. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Barry. Great to join you today.
Lovely. Thank you for coming. How are you doing today?
Doing well. It's Thanksgiving week here in the States. The office is a bit emptier than usual, but looking forward to seeing some family and taking some time off.
Is it time you get some respite? Is it when you have the national holidays? Otherwise, you're busy working all the time, right?
Yeah, maybe a day or two of rest.
Perfect. Lovely. So normally in podcasts, we tell you about yourself and your journey, but who better to know about you and your journey than you? So would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and the company that you work for?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Tejas, founder and co-CEO over here at Hightouch. At a high level, we help companies activate all their customer data. So companies are sitting on a treasure chest of data about how consumers are interacting with their websites, mobile apps, going to stores, doing things off of their brand. And we really help companies use all that data, not for analytics, but for activating it and personalizing marketing they're sending to them. Adjusting how they speak to the customer if a customer calls in, sending them offers, all that kind of jazz, acquiring new customers. By trade, I'm an engineer and kind of technical product person. Before founding the company with two friends, I was an early engineer at another company in the data space called Segment that had a fairly successful exit to a company called Twilio for a few $1 billion a few years ago. And I grew up just really inspired by programming and computers from an early age.
So entrepreneurism and starting your own companies as a co-founder, was that something that you always dreamt of, or was it something that you just happened upon?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it happens either way. For two of us out of the three founders, myself included, had dreamt of starting a company for a really long time. My co-founder and co-CEO, Kashish, I think got interested in the idea through an entrepreneurship club in high school. I think I just had a fascination with it from an early age. So somewhere in between, honestly, late elementary school or middle school, I just always saw these, great companies being built like Microsoft and Facebook, and, watching the entrepreneurs behind them speak and hearing the story just on television and stuff like that and reading about it. And it's the most fascinating thing to me to build something huge that everyone interacts with and changes the way something's fundamentally done in the world from nothing, really starting from nothing. So I got obsessed with the idea of founding something in entrepreneurship from an early age. I had a couple side businesses as well, like a developer consulting thing. I played with a social network thing actually really early when I was in middle school, didn't go anywhere. But Hightouch has been our first real big swing at it.
Was there a pivotal point when you thought, okay, this is a time when I'm going to do it? Was there a moment where you just thought, now's the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with regards to my interest in entrepreneurship, I do think that started from an early age, and I can't exactly remember what got me interested in it, to be honest. I think it's just a fascination of mine. Other kids wanted to be an astronaut or something else, and for me, I just thought this idea of building a company or building something consumers interact with was really interesting on the internet. With regards to actually starting Hightouch, there wasn't exactly I would say the pivotal moment for me was more so the team coming together. I'm someone who is self-motivated and self-driven, but I find it difficult to work on projects completely alone. I've been through that before, found it to be quite difficult, found that my best work's often done in teams, and I really enjoy working with other people on things. It helps me keep accountable as a person, helps me drive forward faster. I just work better bouncing off ideas off people. The starting Hightouch really came down to a timing thing. One of my best friends, Kashish, was actually going to do Y Combinator, a popular startup program here in Silicon Valley one summer, and asked me if I wanted to join as a co-founder, and that's how it all got started.
So we mentioned the time, and you've always had a bit of an interest in it anyway. So what was it in particular about your co-founders that drove you to them or pulled you towards them, if that's a better term?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way I think about finding great co-founders is, and this is personal, everyone has a different way of doing it, and there's success stories on all sides of the spectrum. But for me, they're going to be people that you're going to work with for 12 plus hours a day for many years on end, right? And it's going to be people you're going to go through ups and downs with. So I really wanted to start the company with people I was just personally really good friends with and jived with, as one of the first requirements, actually. I think there's some people who think of it just from a skills perspective and finding complementary skills. And I'd say that's maybe like one of the next few things that I think about. But just first being really good friends with the person, and I wanted work to be, and I can't have this always be the case, but I wanted work to be fun in the early days of starting the company. So that was a big thing for me. The second was kind of like just like a shared motivation. I think founders need to have a shared idea of where they want to take the business. They need to know and be on the same page with how they make decisions. Like, do you want to sell the business, get it acquired? Do you want to take it public? Do you want to push through a rough time, or do you want to quit early? Just like, how are you going to handle those types of decisions and situations? And I really found a high level of alignment with Kashish, my original co-founder, who's still working with us and co-CEO with me, as well as Josh, who joined us later and is our CTO. And that was just really tightly aligned between the three of us as founders. We really, we had some past experiences, and we really wanted to take something big this time and push through any tough moments and work through it. And then I would say, lastly, having complementary skills and just people who you work together with well is really important. I think working together well with people and being efficient and effective in terms of collaborating is actually more important than the complementary skills, in my opinion, because with founders, you're looking more for these T-shaped people who can sort of, plop into area A or B or learn another skill C at any point. And when you start getting into these specialized skills, that's probably when you're hiring and kind of past the 0 to 1 phase anyways.
Great answer. When I ask this question, there's kind of like a bit of a 50-50 divide on how they answer it. Some people say that you shouldn't get into a business with friends. It's a bit like drinking and driving, it's something you should never do. But other people seem quite comfortable and confident with starting a business with friendships. What's your view on that?
I'm definitely in the latter camp. Three of us were friends and actually roommates for years before starting the company together. In addition, I would say, over half the first 10, 15 people we hired at Hightouch as employees, once things really started picking up, were friends of mine, everywhere from longtime friends that I established through, transferring my lease to someone years ago when I first moved to San Francisco, all the way to my co-founders' college friends and their siblings and all sorts of things. So personally, I think a company's hard enough. And with friends, you're able to, at least know that you're going to enjoy all the time you're spending together working. And there's some element of like personal trust that's there. So I wouldn't add additional barriers. Like, of course, there's downsides, but I think it's well worth it.
In terms of like networking, not just friendships, but networking, how important is that to you when actually starting the business, and also once you've got it past the preliminary stages and it's up and running?
Yeah, I mean, in business, I think the kind of saying is, right, your network is your net worth, and I think that's it's still true in the early stage of the company as well as the later stage. In the later stage, I would say it extends down to also the people you've hired, the team, how much they're doing networking. Right, you have a whole sales team where that's a core part of their job, but still kind of strongly believe in this saying to date. In the early days, and there are tricks we took to keep extending our network and making it bigger as you're starting a company. Because not everyone has extensive experience in a certain industry before they start a company, so you need to develop a new network. Examples of those are, things from as simple as just making friendship and relationship and building rapport with people in your industry when you meet them at conferences and all these kinds of stuff, like, not seeing it as a very transactional or business thing, but extending that to personal, because you can get much better favors that way. Or all the way to something more creative we did, which is that every time we had a call with folks to get their feedback on what we were working on and to ask them discovery questions as we were evaluating new business ideas, we would ask them at the end of the call, hey, are there 2 to 3 people in your network that you recommend that we should speak to to dig more into XYZ things that we just talked to you about or something that you brought up. And I would say over half the time, people connected us to at least one other person. And that's just, self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of developing a large network. All the way to another trick we did actually was just connect with an enormous amount of people on LinkedIn. We actually use this app that you can find online called Linked Helper. It's kind of a crazy thing. It's run by, I think, a developer in Russia. And you need to trust it with your LinkedIn password temporarily, but it can send an enormous amount of automated LinkedIn requests to people that match a certain search criteria and get you connected to them. And a fair amount of them would actually be willing to give us feedback on our business.
So this stuff you're giving us, it's gold, isn't it? These hints and tips for anyone looking to work with you in the future. When you're hiring people, do you see people and think, that's a person that I want to have in my company, and let's try to create a role because that person is going to be beneficial? Or do you think role first and then try to find the person that fits the role? Or a bit of both, maybe?
It's definitely a bit of both. I think in the early days of the company, I thought people first a bit more. Maybe that was the right call when you're really small and you just need some generalists to help you out. But at the same time, that led us, like many startups, to hire at some point more people than we needed, to have some unnecessary roles, some duplicative roles across the stack. And since the economic situation that's risen over the last year or so, we've sort of shifted to being very role first. And I actually think that is the right mindset, especially when scaling the company. It forces the right kind of thinking. I do opportunistically think about new roles sometimes through candidates that are sent our ways, but I wouldn't make a decision on a new role altogether without thoroughly thinking through a new person altogether without thoroughly thinking through if it matches a role we should have or if we should add a role and hire this person regardless of whether the person we're talking to joins the company opportunistically. So I think role first is actually a pretty good mindset for startup founders. You get a certain efficiency with having a smaller team and just having the right Lego pieces versus a bunch of other ones.
That's an interesting answer. And it leads into my next question, which is, what's kind of more important to you, competency and ability or character traits and willingness to learn?
Yeah, great question. So I think we have a pretty, kind of strict policy that I think some of these character traits are sort of a hard line. Like there's just a minimum across all those axes that you need. So that comes from just simply being a good person, having empathy, etc. But it also sort of comes from slope. We won't hire people who are super experienced but just don't have a high slope or trajectory because I think there's a domino effect that happens across a company when you have really top talent that's always learning and getting better and super curious and rubbing off on each other. And great people want to work with great people, not necessarily just experienced people. So we have a pretty hard policy on that. At the same time, especially as you scale, there are roles where you just need a more senior talent or need people who with certain experience to meet the bar. So I see both of those areas having minimums, if that makes sense. And then you kind of decide on a case-by-case basis what spikes for what candidate and what you value. But I think both of those areas have minimums, and you can't make a trade-off between them below those minimum thresholds, in all honesty.
So in terms of, again, hiring people, and in the early stages, I suppose it's really easy for you to be very hands-on and say, these are the requirements that I need. How do you maintain that when the company is in that growth phase and keeps growing and growing? Is it much harder for you to keep that focus on specific qualities that you want?
Yeah, great question. So now at 100 employees, we have multiple layers of management. We still make an effort so that every hire that's made in the company, at least one of us three founders speaks with them. It's not a ridiculous thing to do at our stage. Maybe if we were hiring multiple hundreds of people a year, because it actually doesn't depend on your headcount, but how many people you're adding per year, we would have to change that policy, and we will in the future. And we'll delegate that to our trusted leadership team, which we have today, but there's just no reason not to put the extra effort on hiring and meet every candidate personally. But right now, I think at our stage and still for the foreseeable next year, we can do this, and I think it's a really good filter in terms of quality control and having consistency in the way we evaluate those match of company values as well as requirements of the role as well as the person that we're bringing onto our team and if they're a fit. So I think every individual hire is still approved at the founders level at our company, and I think later stage companies are realizing the benefit of having leadership teams that are actually in the details and understanding why every single role is necessary, scrutinizing it, making the company hyper efficient. You can see, Brian Armstrong, actually the CEO of Coinbase, which is obviously a super large publicly traded company, easily 10 times to 50 times our scale here at Hightouch, actually wrote a blog post recently about the changes they're making across the company. That was semi controversial potentially, but I'm pretty pro it. One of the things they're doing is actually having kind of an IQ test. Effectively, they call it something else in the interview process. Another thing they talk about is how Brian is going to personally review every single hire that's made. So if they can do it, there's no reason that we can't at 100 people.
It's interesting. I've never heard that one before about having an IQ test. Definitely, I could see why that would be just controversial.
Yeah. I don't think it was exactly that, but it's something to that degree. I mean, you can think of a lot of the interviews we do on the technical side or various different roles actually across the company as that general intelligence test in disguise, right? Where we're testing aptitude to learn of the person through something that's relevant in their domain by putting them in a challenge that they could face in their job that they haven't experienced before. So
okay, so more like to overcome hardship and see how people react to those kind of stimulus.
More to see how fast they absorb and learn new concepts, I would say.
Oh, okay.
So definitely closer to the IQ end than the behavioral end. Yeah.
Perfect. So I should have asked you this earlier, actually, but why the name Hightouch? What was the founding idea for this company name?
Great question. So ultimately, we're a data company, right? We help companies that have a ton of data inside of their data warehouses better use that data across business processes. But about 70% of the business processes we help with are in marketing, and a lot of the rest of them are actually in customer support and sales and just generally customer facing functions across the company, where we're helping personalize the experience that customers are receiving, whether it's in ads or marketing or sales or customer support or on the phone or product, through using all of a company's data. So high touch is a term in the kind of customer support, customer facing space of like a very high end white glove user experience. And when we were working on the company in the early days, we were actually working on something more in that space, in the support area. But we decided to keep the name because we thought it was just really fit for some of the end states and outcomes that we drive at our customers.
That's really interesting name. I like the idea and I like the basis for that. In the UK at the moment, we kind of went through a phase where we did a lot of remote working due to the COVID situation. Now, it seems that businesses in the UK are trying to refocus away from remote learning and remote working and kind of bring people back to the offices. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, great question. So we didn't refocus ourselves to, we're a remote company, but we didn't refocus ourselves to that. We actually started really scaling aggressively in the pandemic when there was no other option. So we didn't have an office for the first couple of years of business. Now we do have offices. We have two, one in San Francisco, one in New York, but only about 50, 60% of the overall headcount of the company is located in one of those hubs. Over time, we are trying to locate more of the talent in those hubs, but also not try to restrict us on hiring elsewhere as really strong talent exists. And we're not just thinking about San Francisco and New York as those hubs. There's also kind of emerging hubs across the nation and globally, like London, Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have some really good talent. Denver, where we have a good number of sales folks. That just makes sense strategically to also invest in and build up. And we might, consider things like a WeWork in those places over time. Overall, I think there's a lot of value in having employees be able to get together in small groups nearby. And I think the whole in-person element actually does that a lot for collaboration, for setting space, for retention, for inspiring the teams. So we do our best to try to encourage that. But at the same time, I think remote offers this flexibility at a personal level that allows us to attract certain talent that maybe wouldn't consider a startup before if it was all in person, 10 hours, 12 hours a day or something like that, that would consider it in a more flexible work environment, as well as talent that's just, located across the nation, across the world. So I think hybrid is where it's at, with more small hubs, and the flexibility of kind of not having to be in the office every day.
In terms of you individually, so we've talked a bit about your company, we've talked a bit about the hiring process and the group function, but do you take a lot of time to create a work-life balance for you specifically? And if you do, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, great question. So for me individually, I would say, as a founder, you can't really achieve super high levels of work life balance, especially if you're trying to grow the company aggressively, like we are at High Touch, and scale to 100 people in 3 years, and really try to take on a big market like customer data, and be the leader in it, and the winner in it, and create a category. It's just not really possible, frankly, to have like super high work life balance as a founder, in my opinion. You can try, but I don't think it's super possible, but you do have to find those things that allow you to continue to be performant at the workplace, and to be mentally sharp, and to be emotionally there for the company. And for me, those things are still spending a certain amount of time with family and friends, and personal relationships. Also, exercise is a big one for me, where it's just this easy way to refresh my body and also get clear mentally. I can't exercise too much actually, or I'll get too tired, but just the right amount of 3 4 days a week really keeps me in shape. And sometimes when things get too stressful, that actually goes down in my personal life, and I'm exercising less, but then it's more stress, and it all starts to spiral. And I've really realized that it's an essential thing to try to keep up. But yeah, I mean, it's more of a harmony of these things, of work and life, and balance, but versus truly a balance, or keeping those things at tension, if there's any tension between work and life. Personally, I think that makes things very difficult, and eliminating that and understanding why that tension is there and what you can do about it, because in reality you have to balance those two things, is quite important.
What's your expectations for your employees and your staff? Obviously, being a CEO or co-founder, that's a different set of time requirements from a regular job. But what's your expectations from your staff?
Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, being a founder just does have a different expectation than other staff. Same with being an executive at the company. When it comes to general staff, I mean, we're still a fast growing company. We can't. Yes, the founders of the company want to win. Yes, the leaders do, but everyone has to want to win, and feel really passionate about that, and that's important to us. So it's definitely not a 40-hour work week here, like a 9 to 5, but it's probably somewhere between the 50 maybe max 60-hour range. It's not something like finance over in the 100-hour range or 80-hour range or anything like that at the same time. But I don't believe in honestly setting those types of, I guess, requirements of like, you must work these hours, or especially not, you must be in the office these hours. I think it's more about urgency and ownership. And then just being able to, help the company stay on track for the ambitious goals that we set. And being a part of the cultural norm that's set across the company.
So you mentioned there about particularly the high rate of growth that you've been going through. Is your company always in the growth phase, or do you think there are periods of time where you think that let's take a step back, let's stabilize a bit before we go into the next period of growth?
Great question. At a macro level, we're trying to be always in the growth stage. But at a micro level, obviously you can't scale things that you haven't figured out. And that sentiment applies for many parts of the business. It's something we've learned the hard way and the easy way as founders through the last few years, and something that we really hold true, right? So we still have a habit of like, hey, we're trying a new channel, a new idea, a new marketing approach. Let's prove it, and then let's scale it. And that's something we have to have through all our decision processes and planning, and just the way we run the company functionally. But yes, at a macro level, we're always trying to grow aggressively, as much as the environment, which is our product, the market, the economy will allow.
Perfect, great answer. Really, I understand it's kind of logical, isn't it? Really, I suppose where you just need to keep meeting the needs of the demand. So in terms of like influences on your life, have there ever been any books or podcasts or people who've given you inspiration, or you've taken some teachings from and implemented in your own life?
Yeah, great question. So I think the answer is all the time. I do like listening to podcasts, actually. The most interesting ones for me are ones where there's, primary information. So someone being interviewed who's just done something that's really admirable. I was listening to a podcast by the CEO of NVIDIA last week, listened to one, the CEO of Airbnb a few weeks ago. And I think those are really interesting to me, because I can take the learnings from them and like just noodle on some things from them and start to relate it back to my life, my career, my progression, and the company that we're building here at Hightouch. But overall, I don't think there's one thing that I've read or heard that really sticks out as like some archetype company that we're trying to design Hightouch around. I think we're trying to create quite a unique company here. And I believe in like taking lessons and tidbits from each of these things, but not like copying another company one for one, or having a playbook sort of mentality, if that makes sense. So I think a lot of things stick out in small chunks, but nothing sticks out in like a huge one. personally.
Okay, perfect. That's a great answer as well. On the theme of learnings and teachings, what has been like the greatest challenge that you've overcome in your career? What is the one thing that you would say to yourself, like, oh, now I've done this for this many years. This is what I should have done when I was first starting that I didn't think or I knew at the time.
I think one thing I've learned over the last couple of years is just the importance of staying in the details. There's this fine line between, or I guess, how to manage and how to lead a large organization is probably the answer to that question. It's something I'm still learning, so I can't look back and say, oh, I definitely know it now. It's kind of a muscle that you build over time, similar to exercise or getting better and better at a sport. It's not something that you like know or don't know, in my opinion. That being said, I think a lot of scaling the company is understanding what level of depth to be in on what and how to know when things are going wrong, how to have a spider sense for that, and then know when to jump in and get to like the most granular level of detail. And that can mean like 3 layers down. What is someone doing, or what are we responding to customers and support tickets like this? It can mean literally any level of granularity, and then knowing when to step back and to more say things are actually going well in this area. Let me set a higher goal from it and manage it from above. So I think one thing that's difficult for young founders as they're scaling their company is a lot of them hire leaders and then start to figure out, how do I start managing instead of doing? And the reality is like, yes, you need to manage the functions, but that doesn't mean you can kind of set some numbers and close your eyes. Like you need to be in the details of them if you want to have peak performance across your business. And I think, you can't be the best at everything, but founders and CEOs need to be pretty good at a lot of things and continuously look to getting better at them. Even if you're a product person, you need to learn marketing. Even if you're a salesperson, you need to learn product. And the importance of that is really high if you want to run a high performing function and high performing company. It's hard to know if things could be better or know where things are going wrong if you don't know how those things work in the first place.
That's another great answer. Thank you very much for that. Now, unfortunately, we are coming close to the end of this podcast. But before I do, there's usually one question that I like to ask, which is, if there's someone watching this video now who is an entrepreneur or is wanting to become an entrepreneur and is finding them have cold feet, maybe, or a little bit of doubt, is now the right time? Should I do it? Should I make that big step? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think for me, 2 things. One, there's no time better than now to jump in and give it a swing. I think you learn a ton from being an entrepreneur and from trying the startup journey, whether your startup works or doesn't. We've hired a lot of former founders at Hightouch and done a number of acqui-hires and acquisitions, including one last week. And the experience from founding a company and trying to build a company is phenomenal and will pay dividends in the future. At the same time, I think if you want to dip your toes in my opinion, probably improve your chance of success and just like have a bit more of the lay of the land of company building, try to join an early stage company, company that's, at Hightouch's stage, 100 employees ish or below, all the way to the 10 employees range, company where you have access to the founders and leaders and the people that are building and knowing, the types of challenges you see as you scale a company from one stage to, 2, 5, 10x the stage over the next few years. And I think that exposure is actually very valuable, albeit not necessary.
Great advice. I think that's amazing advice that you've just given there. Thank you so much. So unfortunately, it looks like we're running out of time here, but it has been a pleasure talking with you, Tejas, and I want to thank you again for talking with us today.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it.
That was Tejas Manohar, co-founder and co-CEO at Hightouch.